The morning shift at Greenwood Community Hospital began like any other. Nurses shuffled through sterile hallways with steaming coffee cups, nodding sleepy greetings to their night shift counterparts. The gentle hum of medical equipment provided a familiar backdrop to the start of another day in healthcare. Dr. Sarah Franklin, the hospital director, was reviewing overnight reports in her office when the first scream echoed through the lobby. She dismissed it initially. Hospitals often hosted intense emotions. But when a second cry rang out, followed by the thundering of running feet, she knew something was wrong. "Dr. Franklin!" Her assistant burst through the door, face pale. "You need to see this, now!" Sarah hurried to the main entrance, where a crowd had gathered at the glass doors. Security guards stood with their hands hovering over their weapons, faces tight with tension. And there, just beyond the automatic doors, sat a full-grown male lion. "Dear God," Sarah whispered. The lion was massive, its tawny mane catching the early morning light. It sat calmly, almost regally, directly in front of the entrance. Most striking was its demeanor. No pacing, no aggression, just an unsettling stillness as it watched the doors with intense focus. "I've called animal control," Head of Security Mike Torres reported, his voice tight. "And the police. Nobody's quite sure how to handle this." "Has it tried to attack anyone?" Sarah asked, studying the beast. "No, ma'am. That's the strange part. It just showed up about 20 minutes ago and sat down. Won't move, won't leave. Just keep watching the door." The lobby erupted into chaos as people noticed the unexpected visitor. "Is it from the zoo?" someone shouted. "Did it escape from a circus?" asked another. Phones emerged from pockets as visitors and staff began recording the surreal scene. "Lock down all ground floor entrances," Sarah ordered. "Route everyone through the parking garage for now, and get me Dr. Evans from the veterinary clinic downtown. We need someone who understands big cats." As security scrambled to follow her instructions, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this situation. The lion's behavior defied everything she knew about wild animals. It showed no signs of fear or aggression, no indication it was lost or confused. If anything, it appeared to be waiting. "Dr. Franklin?" A nurse approached cautiously. "The morning news vans are already setting up outside. They're requesting a statement." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. In 15 years of hospital administration, she'd handled everything from budget crises to natural disasters. But nothing in her training had prepared her for this. "Tell them we're taking all necessary precautions to ensure patient and staff safety," she replied. "And get me everything you can find about lion behavior. Something tells me this isn't a simple case of a wild animal wandering into the city." The lion shifted slightly, its eyes never leaving the hospital entrance. In that moment, Sarah could have sworn she saw something in those amber eyes, something that looked remarkably like purpose. Police cruisers surrounded the hospital perimeter within the hour, their lights flashing silently against the building's brick facade. Officers set up barricades while bewildered patients peered from upper windows, many recording videos on their phones. The lion remained unmoved by the growing commotion, maintaining its vigilant watch of the entrance. "The nearest zoo confirms they're not missing any lions," Officer Rodriguez reported to Sarah. "Same with traveling circuses and licensed sanctuaries within a 100-mile radius. This cat came from somewhere else." Inside the hospital, staff struggled to maintain normalcy. Nurse manager Helen Chen directed traffic through alternative routes, trying to keep patients calm despite the circus developing outside. "Just a minor situation at the main entrance," she assured worried visitors. "Nothing to be concerned about." But concern spread like wildfire through the hospital's corridors. Social media exploded with photos and videos of the hospital lion, as it was quickly dubbed. Local news stations interrupted regular programming with live coverage, their helicopters circling overhead despite police requests to maintain distance. Dr. Karen Evans arrived shortly before noon, her veterinary expertise immediately evident in her careful assessment of the situation. She stood at a safe distance, observing the lion through binoculars. "This is fascinating," she muttered, making notes on a small pad. He's showing none of the typical stress behaviors we'd expect in this situation. No pacing, no aggressive displays, no signs of fear. Is that unusual? Sarah asked, watching the lion yawn lazily in the morning sun. Extremely. Lions are territorial, but they're also naturally cautious around humans and unfamiliar environments. This one's behavior suggests familiarity, maybe even purpose. A young resident interrupted their discussion, his face tight with worry. Dr. Franklin, the board is requesting an emergency meeting. They're concerned about liability issues and public safety. Sarah nodded, knowing this crisis was about to become even more complicated. Tell them I'll be there in 10 minutes. And Dr. Evans, I'd appreciate your input at the meeting. The hospital board gathered in the conference room, tension evident in their faces. Chairman Douglas Weber paced at the head of the table, his usual composed demeanor fractured by the unprecedented situation. We have over 300 patients in this facility, he began, gesturing to the windows where news helicopters still circled. Not to mention staff, visitors, and the reputation of this institution to consider. We need this situation resolved immediately. With all due respect, Dr. Evans interjected, rushing to action could make things worse. This lion's behavior is unique. He's not acting aggressively or showing signs of distress. In fact, he seems to be deliberately choosing to stay here. Choose? Wabir scoffed. It's a wild animal, doctor. It doesn't make choices about which hospitals to visit. Actually, lions are incredibly intelligent creatures, Karen countered. They're capable of forming strong bonds and demonstrating complex behaviors. Something brought this lion here, and until we understand what that is, any attempt to remove him forcefully could end in tragedy. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the hospital grounds, the mystery of the lion's origins only deepened. Wildlife authorities had contacted every registered facility within 5 states. No one was missing a male lion. More puzzling still were the reports from local residents who claimed they'd seen the lion moving through wooded areas over the past week, always heading in the direction of the hospital. Look at this, Dr. Evans called, motioning Sarah over to her laptop. I've been reviewing security footage from nearby businesses. Our friend here didn't just wander in randomly. He's been circling the hospital for days, almost like he was studying it. Sarah leaned in, watching grainy nighttime footage of the lion moving with purpose through an empty parking lot. That doesn't look like a lost animal. No, Karen agreed. And look at this marking. She zoomed in on a still image showing a distinctive scar across the lion's left front paw. This isn't just any lion. Someone's cared for him before. That's a surgical scar, professionally done. The hospital continued to function around them, though the atmosphere had shifted. Staff members who initially panicked now moved cautiously past windows overlooking the entrance, some even waving to their unusual visitor. The lion acknowledged them with regal indifference, maintaining its steady watch. Dr. Franklin! A nurse hurried over, clutching a medical chart. You need to see this. We've been reviewing recent admissions, looking for any possible connection. 3 days ago, we admitted James Lawson. He's in ICU. His paperwork mentions extensive work in wildlife conservation, specifically with big cats in Africa. Sarah's heart quickened. Where is he now? Critical condition, 4th floor. He was brought in with severe injuries from a car accident. Been unconscious since admission. Dr. Evans was already pulling up information on her phone. James Lawson. Wait, I know that name. He ran a rehabilitation program in Tanzania working with injured lions. There was an article about him in National Geographic a few years back. They hurried to the ICU where James Lawson lay still and pale, surrounded by beeping monitors. His sister Susan sat beside him, her eyes red from crying. When Sarah mentioned the lion outside, Susan's face changed. "Show me a picture," she demanded. Sarah pulled up the security camera feed on her tablet. Susan's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, that's impossible! That's Leo!" "Leo?" Jimmy's miracle case. A lion cub he found nearly dead from poachers' traps. Spent months rehabilitating him, teaching him to trust humans again. When Leo was strong enough, Jimmy released him back into the wild. That was 3 years ago in Tanzania. Tanzania? Sarah's mind reeled. That's thousands of miles away. How could… The scar, Karen interrupted. Susan, did Leo have surgery on his left paw? Yes, Jimmy had to operate to remove infected tissue from the trap wound. He always said that scar was Leo's reminder of survival. They all turned to look out the ICU window, where the lion, Leo, maintained his vigil 4 floors below. Somehow, impossibly, he had found his way across an ocean, across a continent, to the one person who had once saved his life. The revelation about Leo's identity transformed the atmosphere at Greenwood Community Hospital. Staff members who had initially moved through the halls in fear now gathered at windows, speaking in hushed, almost reverent tones about the lion's incredible journey. Look how he responds to the nurses, Dr. Evans observed, watching as Leo's ears twitched forward when hospital staff exited the building. He's not just tolerating their presence. He's actively monitoring them. I've never seen anything like it. The local news had dubbed him the Vigilant Lion, and the name stuck. Camera crews maintained a constant presence, broadcasting live updates about Leo's unwavering vigil. Social media exploded with theories and emotional responses, many drawing parallels to famous stories of animal loyalty. Up in the ICU, Jimmy Lawson's condition remained critical. His sister Susan spent hours sharing stories with the medical team about Jimmy's work in Africa. He had a way with them, she explained, her voice thick with emotion. Especially Leo. That cub was barely alive when Jimmy found him. Leg mangled in a poacher's trap, infection setting in. Everyone said to put him down, that he was too far gone. Dr. Franklin listened intently, noting how Leo's head would turn slightly whenever the ICU doors opened, as if hoping to catch a glimpse of his former savior. But Jimmy refused? He said he saw something in Leo's eyes, a fight to live that matched his own determination. He spent 3 months nursing that cub back to health, sleeping in the sanctuary clinic, hand-feeding him, cleaning his wounds. The other staff said they'd never seen anything like their bond. Dr. Evans had been documenting Leo's behavior patterns, creating a detailed log of his responses to various stimuli. He's not showing any signs of hunger or exhaustion, she noted, which means he's either finding food somewhere nearby or someone's feeding him, Sarah finished. She'd noticed the small offerings appearing near Leo's spot, bowls of water, pieces of meat left at a respectful distance. The community was quietly ensuring their unusual guardian was cared for. A young nurse approached hesitantly. Dr. Franklin, some of us were wondering, could we maybe bring Leo's scent to Mr. Lawson? Studies show coma patients can respond to familiar smells, and if their connection is as strong as his sister says… Sarah glanced at Dr. Evans, who was already nodding thoughtfully. We'd need to be extremely careful about contamination protocols, but it might help. At the very least, it could give us more insight into their bond. As they discussed logistics, a commotion arose from the front entrance. A local animal control officer, eager to prove himself, had decided to take matters into his own hands. He approached Leo with a tranquilizer gun, ignoring shouts from Dr. Evans and the gathered crowd. Leo's response was remarkable. Instead of attacking or fleeing, he simply stood, positioning himself more firmly in front of the hospital doors. His message was clear. He wasn't leaving, but he also wasn't looking for a fight. The officer lowered his weapon, finally understanding what everyone else had begun to realize. This wasn't just an animal causing a disruption. This was a guardian keeping watch, driven by a connection that defied conventional explanation. This has gone on long enough, Police Chief Rogers declared, pounding his fist on the conference room table. 5 days had passed since Leo's arrival, and patience was wearing thin among city officials. That lion is a public safety hazard, regardless of its supposed connection to your patient. Dr. Franklin stood her ground, backed by Dr. Evans and several board members who'd been won over by Leo's peaceful presence. He hasn't shown a single sign of aggression. If anything, he's been a deterrent to troublemakers. Emergency room incidents are down 40% since he arrived. And what happens when some idiot tries to take a selfie with him? Or when he finally gets hungry enough to see humans as prey? The chief's face reddened. The mayor's office is breathing down my neck. They want this situation resolved today. Before Sarah could respond, Helen Chen burst into the room. "Dr. Franklin! Leo's gone!" The announcement sent shockwaves through the meeting. Everyone rushed to the windows, staring at the now empty space where the lion had maintained his vigil for nearly a week. "There," Dr. Evans pointed to the tree line behind the hospital. "He's heading into the woods." Sarah felt a mix of relief and concern. Maybe he's finally given up? No, Karen shook her head. Lions are crepuscular, most active at dawn and dusk. He's probably hunting. He'll be back. Sure enough, an hour later, Leo returned, resuming his position as if he'd never left. Security footage later confirmed he'd taken down a deer in the nearby forest, solving the mystery of how he'd sustained himself. Upstairs, Jimmy Lawson's condition was deteriorating. His latest CT scan showed increased intracranial pressure, and the medical team was running out of options. "We need to consider extreme measures," Dr. Rodriguez, the neurosurgeon, advised. "The next 24 hours are critical." Susan Lawson sat by her brother's bed, tears streaming down her face. "He was always the strong one," she whispered. "Even in Africa, facing down poachers, dealing with dangerous animals, nothing scared him when he believed he was doing the right thing." Outside, the hospital board was facing its own crisis. Insurance underwriters were threatening to revoke coverage if the lion situation wasn't resolved. 3 major donors had pulled their funding, citing concerns about the hospital's judgment. "We're not just risking our reputation anymore," Chairman Weber warned. "We're risking our ability to function as a medical facility." Sarah stared out at Leo, who remained steadfast despite the growing pressures surrounding him. Somehow, this animal had navigated across continents, found this specific hospital, and refused to leave. There had to be a reason, something they were missing. "Give me 48 hours, she pleaded. "Something's coming to a head here. I can feel it. If nothing changes by then, I'll authorize whatever measures you deem necessary." As if understanding the gravity of her words, Leo turned his massive head toward her window. Their eyes met across the distance, and Sarah felt that same chill she'd experienced on the first day. There was an intelligence there, a purpose that transcended normal animal behavior. Dr. Karen Evans approached Leo with measured steps, her heart pounding despite years of experience with big cats. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hospital grounds as she implemented her carefully planned protocol for closer observation. "Easy now," she murmured, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. She carried no tranquilizer guns or restraints, only her medical kit and a profound respect for the creature before her. Leo watched her approach, his amber eyes tracking every movement. Unlike typical wild lions, he showed no signs of aggression or fear. Instead, he maintained the same alert but calm demeanor that had characterized his entire vigil. "Dr. Evans!" Susan Lawson called from behind the safety barrier. "Be careful! Jimmy always said Leo was gentle, but that was years ago." The warning died in her throat as they watched Leo's reaction. The lion's ears perked forward at the sound of Jimmy's name, and his tail stilled, a sign of focused attention that Dr. Evans immediately noted in her observations. "He recognizes the name," she called back softly. "See how his behavior changes when we mention Jimmy?" From her office window, Dr. Franklin watched the interaction while fielding calls from Dr. Rahul Mehra, director of the local wildlife sanctuary. "No, we haven't tried sedation yet," she explained. "Dr. Evans believes there's more to learn from his natural behavior." Down below, Karen had managed to position herself within 20 feet of Leo, closer than anyone had dared approach since his arrival. She began her assessment, speaking into a small recorder. "Subject shows excellent physical condition despite the lengthy journey. Coat healthy, gait normal, no signs of dehydration or malnutrition. Surgical scar on left paw is well healed, consistent with professional veterinary care." Leo observed her documentation process with what almost seemed like patience. When she moved a few steps closer, he shifted slightly but didn't retreat. "My God," Karen breathed. "He's actually allowing a medical evaluation. This level of human tolerance shouldn't be possible in a wild lion, even one with previous rehabilitation experience." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Jimmy's parents, their rental car pulling up to the hospital's secondary entrance. Leo's reaction was immediate. He rose to his feet, eyes fixed on the new arrivals, nostrils flaring as he processed their scent. He recognizes something about them, Dr. Evans realized. The family connection, maybe? Lions have an incredible sense of smell. Robert and Margaret Lawson emerged from their car, stopping short at the sight of the massive predator. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "Robert, look at his paw! That's him! That's Leo! The pictures Jimmy sent us!" The lion's tail swayed gently. Not the agitated lashing of a threat display, but the soft motion of recognition. For a moment, the connection between this wild creature and the human family he'd adopted was almost tangible. Then the hospital's emergency alarms began blaring, and everything changed. Jimmy had gone into cardiac arrest, and Leo's peaceful demeanor vanished. His roar echoed across the grounds as medical staff rushed past the windows above, and no one doubted who he was calling for. The close encounter had revealed more than they'd expected, but time was running out for Jimmy Lawson. And Leo, somehow, seemed to know it. Dr. Evans and Dr. Mara sat in the hospital library, surrounded by stacks of wildlife magazines and research papers. News footage played silently on a laptop, showing Leo's morning patrol of his self-appointed territory around the hospital entrance. "Here it is," Karen said, pointing to a glossy photo spread in National Geographic. 3 years ago, the Lion Whisperer of Tanzania. That's Jimmy with Leo right after the surgery." The image showed a younger Jimmy Lawson kneeling beside a sedated lion cub, carefully bandaging its injured paw. The determination in his eyes matched the gentle confidence in his hands. "The recovery protocols he developed were revolutionary," Dr. Mara noted, scrolling through an academic paper. "Most sanctuaries wouldn't attempt rehabilitation on a cub that was severely injured. The infection alone should have been fatal." Susan Lawson entered with a worn leather journal, her eyes red from another sleepless night by her brother's bedside. "I found Jimmy's old field notes. He documented everything about Leo's recovery." The entries painted a vivid picture. Jimmy had slept beside the cub's cage for weeks, hand-feeding him, cleaning his wounds, talking to him constantly. Other staff members reported hearing him reading scientific papers aloud during night shifts, explaining each treatment to his tiny patient. "Listen to this entry," Susan read, her voice trembling. "Day 47. Leo made eye contact for the first time without sedation. Not the vacant stare of a wild animal, but real connection. He's learning to trust again, and somehow, I feel like he's teaching me too." A news reporter who'd been investigating Jimmy's background appeared at the door. "Dr. Franklin, you need to see this footage. We found it in our archives." The video showed Jimmy at a conservation conference 2 years ago, passionately arguing against trophy hunting. "These aren't just animals," he declared. "They're intelligent, emotional beings capable of forming deep bonds. Leo taught me that. The day we released him, he looked back at me with such awareness, like he understood everything." Dr. Evans studied the current security feeds. The way he positions himself at the entrance, it's almost like he's recreating their positions from the sanctuary. See how he stays in the light, visible to the staff? That's learned behavior. But how did he find the hospital? Dr. Mara wondered. Even if he somehow made it to America. "The accident report," Susan interrupted, pulling out police documents. "Jimmy's car crashed just 3 miles from here. There were unusual tracks at the scene." "Lion tracks?" Karen asked sharply. "The police dismissed them. I mean, who'd believe a lion was in Virginia? But if Leo was already following Jimmy..." Dr. Franklin's phone buzzed. Another text from the hospital board demanding action. But how could they make a decision when the story kept growing more extraordinary? Outside, Leo shifted his position as the sun reached its peak. The scar on his paw caught the light, a permanent reminder of the human who'd given him a second chance at life. Now, against all odds, he seemed determined to return the favor. Jimmy's vital signs continued their gradual decline, each beep of the monitor slower than the last. Dr. Rodriguez stared at the latest brain scans with growing concern, while outside the window, news helicopters circled endlessly, documenting Leo's unwavering vigil. His intracranial pressure is reaching critical levels, Rodriguez explained to Dr. Franklin. If we don't see improvement in the next 24 hours, we'll need to consider more aggressive interventions. The tension in the hospital had reached a breaking point. National media outlets were running constant coverage, their headlines growing more sensational by the hour. Lion's last stand, wild guardian angel, beast's bedside vigil. Celebrity zoologists were offering their theories on national television, while social media exploded with both support and criticism. Dr. Evans burst into the conference room, clutching her tablet. "Look at this! Someone uploaded footage from Tanzania. It's Leo's release day." The gathered staff watched as a younger, healthier Jimmy Lawson opened a transport cage. The fully grown Leo emerged cautiously, padding onto African soil. But instead of running toward freedom, he turned back, pressing his head against Jimmy's hand one last time. "That's not normal release behavior," Dr. Mara commented. "Most rehabilitated animals bolt immediately. This shows extraordinary bonds of trust." Sarah's phone rang, the mayor himself demanding immediate action. "The city council is convening an emergency session," he warned. "Either you remove that lion, or we'll send in specialized units to do it for you." "Sir," Sarah fought to keep her voice steady, "we're dealing with something unprecedented here. This isn't just a wild animal. This is a creature displaying complex emotional behavior and possible awareness of his former rescuer's condition. It's also a liability nightmare. What happens when some fool tries to pet it and gets mauled?" As if to underscore the point, security had to stop 3 teenagers attempting to sneak past the barriers for selfies with Leo. The lion had merely watched them with regal disdain, but the incident added fuel to the officials' arguments. Up in the ICU, Susan clutched her brother's hand. "Jimmy, if you can hear me, you need to wake up. They're going to take Leo away if you don't. He came all this way for you." Dr. Evans appeared in the doorway. "Dr. Franklin, I have a proposal. It's risky, but given the circumstances..." "What kind of proposal?" "A controlled interaction. We bring Jimmy down to where Leo can see him, even smell him. If their connection is as strong as we think..." "Absolutely not," Chairman Weber interrupted, having overheard. "The liability alone..." "Could be managed," Sarah finished. "We have the loading dock. It's secured, controlled access. We could set up proper barriers." Susan stood up. "Do it! Jimmy would want us to try. He always said Leo was special, different from any animal he'd ever worked with." The monitors beeped steadily as they debated, while outside, Leo's eyes remained fixed on the hospital windows, watching, waiting, hoping for a glimpse of the human who had once saved his life. Time was running out for both of them. Dawn painted the hospital loading dock in shades of gray as the medical team made their final preparations. Steel barriers created a secure corridor, and tranquilizer teams stood ready at strategic points. Dr. Evans had personally overseen every detail of the setup, ensuring both safety and the possibility of meaningful interaction. "Vital signs stable enough for transport," Dr. Rodriguez confirmed, checking Jimmy's monitors. The hospital bed had been reinforced, equipped with emergency response gear, and positioned behind a protective shield of reinforced plexiglass. Sarah watched Leo through the security feeds as Dr. Evans approached him. "Remember, if he shows any signs of aggression, we abort immediately," she instructed the teams via radio. The tension in her voice reflected the enormous risk they were taking. "Look at his body language," Dr. Mara observed, pointing to the monitors. "No raised hackles, no tension in the shoulders. He knows something's happening." Karen reached Leo's usual spot, speaking softly to him. Years of experience with big cats helped steady her nerves. But this was different. This lion had crossed continents, defied natural behavior patterns, and maintained a peaceful vigil that challenged everything they understood about wild animals. "Leo," she called gently, "we're going to take you to Jimmy." The lion's ears perked forward at Jimmy's name. When Karen began walking toward the loading dock, Leo rose and followed at a respectful distance, his movements fluid and purposeful. "My God," Susan whispered from behind the barriers. "He's actually responding to guidance." The medical team wheeled Jimmy's bed into position as Leo entered the loading dock area. The lion froze, nostrils flaring as he processed the scents. His eyes fixed on Jimmy's unconscious form, and a low rumble, not quite a growl, not quite a purr, emanated from his chest. "Heart rate elevated but stable," a nurse reported, monitoring Jimmy's vitals. Leo moved closer, each step deliberate. Until he reached the plexiglass, he pressed his nose against it, directly level with Jimmy's hand. The rumbling grew louder. Then Jimmy's fingers twitched. "Movement in the left hand," Dr. Rodriguez called. "BP rising slightly. He's responding to something." Leo's tail swayed gently as Jimmy's eyes fluttered. The massive cat remained perfectly still, watching, waiting, as his former savior fought his way back to consciousness. "Jimmy?" Susan's voice broke. "Jimmy, can you hear us?" Her brother's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first. Then they settled on the lion beyond the glass, and tears began rolling down his cheeks. "Leo?" His voice was barely a whisper, but the lion's reaction was immediate. A deep, resonant sound, something between a roar and a call, filled the loading dock. For the first time in a week, Leo lay down, his vigil temporarily suspended as he pressed against the barrier separating him from Jimmy. There wasn't a dry eye among the witnesses as man and beast reunited, defying distance, time, and the very laws of nature to find each other again. The monitors showed strengthening vital signs as Jimmy weakly raised his hand to the glass. On the other side, Leo lifted his massive paw, the one bearing the surgical scar, and placed it directly opposite Jimmy's palm. The video of Jimmy and Leo's reunion went viral within hours. Cell phone footage captured through the loading dock windows showed the touching moment when the lion placed his scarred paw against the glass, matching Jimmy's weakened hand. News stations played it on repeat, drawing millions of views and sparking intense debate. "This is completely irresponsible," Dr. Marcus Chen, a prominent zoologist, declared on national television. "No matter how touching it seems, we're talking about a wild predator in an urban environment. The hospital administration should be held accountable for endangering public safety." Social media exploded with opposing hashtags. Hashtag "Let Leo Stay" and hashtag "Safety Over Sentiment" trended nationally. Outside the hospital, two groups of protesters faced off across the parking lot, their signs reflecting the division: "Protect our children" versus "Protect their bond." Police had to establish a buffer zone between the groups as tensions rose. "The City Council has voted unanimously," Mayor Thompson announced at an emergency press conference. "We're giving the hospital 48 hours to remove the lion, or animal control will be authorized to use whatever means necessary. The safety of our citizens must come first." Inside her office, Dr. Franklin faced the increasingly hostile hospital board. "Jimmy's showing significant improvement since the interaction," she argued, spreading his latest medical charts across the table. "His intracranial pressure has decreased, and he's responding to stimuli in ways we hadn't seen before." "And what about our liability insurance?" Chairman Weber countered, his face flushed with frustration. "They're threatening to cancel our coverage. 3 major donors have already withdrawn their pledges. We're looking at millions in potential losses. The hospital's future is at stake." Dr. Evans stormed in, waving a stack of papers. "We've got offers from 6 different wildlife sanctuaries willing to take Leo, but they all want to wait until Jimmy's stable enough to be involved in the transfer. They understand the unique nature of this bond. These are respected institutions backing our position." Outside, local businesses had begun taking sides. The diner across from the hospital started a Feed Leo campaign, providing fresh meat daily. Others demanded boycotts of any business supporting the dangerous animal's presence. The community was fracturing over the issue. Susan Lawson faced the media, her voice trembling but determined. "My brother dedicated his life to proving that animals are capable of emotional intelligence beyond our understanding. Leo is living proof of that. He traveled thousands of miles, somehow found this specific hospital, and has shown nothing but peaceful intentions. How can we respond to that loyalty with violence?" Dr. Franklin watched from her window as Leo accepted his daily meal from the diner staff, his movements deliberately gentle, his behavior impeccable. He'd become more than just a lion now. He was a symbol of something profound about the connection between humans and animals. "We're not giving up," she told her assembled staff. "Not when we're witnessing something that could change our understanding of animal consciousness forever. There has to be a way to protect both public safety and this extraordinary relationship." Jimmy's latest brain scan revealed a dangerous buildup of pressure that couldn't be ignored. Dr. Rodriguez gathered the surgical team in the conference room, their faces grave as they reviewed the images. "We need to operate immediately," he announced, pointing to the area of concern. "The improvement we saw after Leo's visit has plateaued. Without intervention, he could suffer permanent damage or worse." Dr. Franklin glanced out the window where Leo maintained his vigil, now surrounded by a mix of protesters and supporters. The mayor's deadline was less than 24 hours away, adding another layer of urgency to an already critical situation. "What are his chances?" Sarah asked, watching Susan Lawson pace outside Jimmy's room. 50-50 at best," Rodriguez replied. "The location is tricky, and his condition is already compromised, but without surgery—" He left the sentence unfinished. Dr. Evans entered with her latest observations. "Leo's picking up on something. His behavior changed about an hour ago, more alert, more agitated. It's like he senses the increased activity around Jimmy." The surgical prep began as the sun set over the hospital. News crews maintained their vigil alongside Leo, broadcasting live updates about Jimmy's condition. Social media lit up with prayers and well wishes from around the world. "We've got another problem," Chairman Weber announced, hurrying into the pre-op area. Animal Control just arrived with their transport equipment. They're planning to take Leo during the surgery when media attention is focused elsewhere. Sarah felt her heart sink. They can't. The stress of seeing them approach could cause Leo to finally act aggressively. Everything we've worked for could be destroyed. Not to mention what it might do to Jimmy if he survives the surgery only to find Leo gone, Dr. Evans added, her voice tight with concern. Outside, Leo's behavior grew increasingly restless. He paced the entrance, his eyes fixed on the upper floors where Jimmy was being prepped. His deep rumbling could be heard through the hospital's thick windows, a sound that carried both worry and warning. "Look at him," Dr. Evans whispered. "He knows. Somehow, he knows Jimmy's in danger. I've never seen anything like this level of emotional awareness in a wild animal." As the surgical team scrubbed in, Dr. Franklin made a decision that could cost her her career. "Tell Animal Control they'll have to go through me first. Nobody touches that lion until we know Jimmy's fate." Susan approached Dr. Franklin, tears in her eyes. "The protesters are getting more aggressive. Someone threw a rock at Leo. He didn't even flinch. He won't leave his post." The operation was scheduled for dawn. As darkness fell over the hospital, 2 vigils continued. One by a devoted lion who had crossed continents, and another by the humans who had come to believe in the power of his extraordinary bond. The next few hours would determine not just Jimmy's fate, but Leo's as well, and perhaps the future of how humans understand the depth of animal consciousness. The weight of these possibilities hung heavy in the air as the hospital prepared for what could be its most challenging night yet. Dawn broke over Greenwood Community Hospital with an eerie silence. The usual morning bustle was muted as staff prepared for Jimmy's surgery. News vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical trees in the dim light. "Surgical team is ready," Dr. Rodriguez reported, his surgical cap already in place. "We're prepping the OR now. Based on these latest scans, We'll need to work quickly to reduce the intracranial pressure." Security had established a wider perimeter around Leo, keeping both protesters and supporters at a safe distance. The lion's behavior had grown more intense, his pacing more frequent, his attention fixed on the hospital's upper floors. Every few minutes, he would stop and stare intently at specific windows, as if tracking movement inside. "Look at his pupils," Dr. Evans observed through her binoculars. "Dilated, but not in a predatory way. He's displaying clear signs of distress. The timing can't be coincidental. His behavioral patterns have completely shifted from his normal routine." Inside the pre-op room, Jimmy's vital signs remained unstable. Susan held her brother's hand as the nurses prepared him for surgery. "Leo's still here," she whispered to him. "He's not giving up, so you can't either. You have to fight, Jimmy. You have to come back to us." Dr. Franklin juggled multiple crises at once. Animal control units were staging in the parking garage, ignoring her orders to wait. The mayor's office kept calling, demanding updates. The hospital board was threatening to suspend her if she didn't comply with the removal order. "BP dropping!" a nurse called out suddenly. "He's crashing!" The emergency response was immediate. As medical staff rushed to stabilize Jimmy, a deep roar echoed through the hospital grounds. Leo had risen to his full height, his powerful voice carrying through the morning air, causing windows to vibrate with its intensity. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Evans breathed, documenting frantically. "He's responding to Jimmy's distress from outside the building. The level of awareness, it defies everything we know about animal behavior." "BP stabilizing," the nurse reported finally. "We can proceed with transport to OR." As they wheeled Jimmy toward surgery, Leo's roars subsided to low rumbles. The massive cat resumed his pacing, but his eyes never left the building's upper windows. His movements were precise, calculated, as if he was following Jimmy's journey through the hospital. Dr. Franklin watched the surgical prep through the observation window, her phone buzzing constantly with messages she couldn't afford to answer. Everything hinged on the next few hours: Jimmy's life, Leo's fate, her career, and perhaps our very understanding of the bonds between humans and animals. The sun climbed higher as Dr. Rodriguez made the first incision, while outside, a lion who had defied nature itself maintained his vigil, waiting to learn if his extraordinary journey had been in vain. The morning light caught the scar on his paw, a permanent reminder of the man who had once saved his life, and who now needed saving in return. As the surgery progressed into its second hour, the crowd outside the hospital grew restless. The mix of protesters, supporters, and media created a volatile atmosphere that security struggled to contain. Leo remained fixed in his position, but his muscles were visibly tense, responding to the growing chaos around him. "We've got trouble," Mike Torres radioed from his security post. "3 guys with cameras trying to slip through the east barrier. They're heading straight for Leo. Looks like they're live streaming." Dr. Evans, who had been monitoring Leo's behavior, immediately spotted the threat. "Don't let them get close! His stress levels are already elevated from Jimmy's surgery. The last thing we need is a confrontation." But the wannabe social media stars had already breached the perimeter, smartphones held high as they approached the lion. Their loud voices and aggressive movements shattered the morning's tense quiet. "Hey kitty, look over here," one called, while another threw a small stone to get Leo's attention. "This is going to get us so many views." The lion's response was immediate but measured. He rose to his full height, releasing a warning roar that echoed off the hospital walls. The intruders froze, finally understanding the magnitude of their mistake as they faced down 400 pounds of apex predator. "Back away slowly," Dr. Evans called through her megaphone. "Do not run! No sudden movements!" Leo took 3 deliberate steps toward the trespassers, his message clear. This was his territory, and they were not welcome. The young men retreated hastily, their bravado evaporating in the face of natural majesty. "Remarkable," Dr. Mehra noted, watching from behind the safety barrier. He could have easily attacked, but he chose intimidation instead. This level of restraint in a wild animal, It's beyond anything I've seen in 30 years of research." The incident sparked an immediate response from the community. Local veterans and retired police officers stepped forward, volunteering to form a human chain between Leo and potential troublemakers. They understood something about loyalty and standing guard. "He's protecting more than just territory," Sarah observed, watching as Leo returned to his vigil position. "He's protecting Jimmy's entire hospital family. Look how he positions himself to watch both the entrance and the surgical floor windows." As the day wore on, Leo continued to deter other thrill-seekers with the same controlled responses. Not once did he chase or attack, yet his presence commanded absolute respect. He was teaching them all a lesson about power and its responsible use. "The police want to press charges against the intruders," Mike reported. "They're saying it's criminal trespassing and reckless endangerment." Sarah nodded, watching Leo settle back into his watchful pose. "Make sure they do. We need to send a message that this isn't a circus attraction. This is about life and death, loyalty and love." Above them in the operating room, Jimmy's surgery continued, while his faithful guardian kept watch below, protecting him just as Jimmy had once protected a wounded lion cub in the savannas of Africa. The surgery lasted 8 grueling hours. Dr. Rodriguez emerged from the OR looking exhausted, but cautiously optimistic. "We've managed to reduce the pressure. The next 24 hours will be critical, but the procedure went as well as we could have hoped." In recovery, Jimmy remained unconscious, but his vital signs were stronger. Susan sat beside him, holding his hand and describing Leo's continued vigil. Outside, the lion had barely moved during the entire surgery, his eyes fixed on the hospital windows. "Show him," Susan requested, gesturing to the tablet Dr. Evans had been using to document Leo's behavior. The medical team carefully positioned the screen where Jimmy could see it if he opened his eyes. "He needs to know Leo's still here." Hours passed. The sun set and rose again. Then, finally, Jimmy's fingers twitched against his sister's palm. "He's waking up," Dr. Rodriguez announced, quickly checking pupils and responses. "Jimmy, can you hear us?" Jimmy's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. Then they fixed it on the tablet, showing the live feed of Leo. Tears began rolling down his cheeks as recognition dawned in his eyes. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube. "How did he—" "He found you," Susan explained softly. "Somehow, he crossed oceans and continents. He's been here for days, refusing to leave. He's been protecting the hospital, protecting you." Jimmy's medical team watched in amazement as their patient became more alert, his eyes never leaving the image of Leo. "I remember the accident," he said slowly. "But before that, I thought I saw in the woods." "Lion tracks at the crash site," Dr. Evans confirmed. "He was already following you, wasn't he? The police reports mentioned unusual tracks, but no one believed it could actually be a lion." Jimmy nodded weakly. "I spotted him a few times in the preserve where I work. Thought I was imagining things, a lion in Virginia, but I knew that scar." His voice broke. "I never thought I'd see him again, not after the release." "Tell us about him," Sarah encouraged, starting the recorder to document this extraordinary story. "We need to understand how this happened." "He was barely alive when we found him," Jimmy recalled, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Poacher's trap had nearly taken his leg. The other sanctuary said to euthanize him, but there was something in his eyes, a will to live that matched my own stubbornness." As Jimmy spoke, Leo's ears twitched below, as if he could sense his friend was finally awake. The bond between them, already extraordinary, seemed to defy every natural law. "We spent 3 months together," Jimmy continued. "I slept in the clinic, hand-fed him, cleaned his wounds. He taught me more about healing than any medical text could. When we released him, I felt like I was losing part of myself." The story of their first meeting poured out, filling in the gaps of their incredible journey. And with each word, Jimmy's recovery seemed to accelerate, as if Leo's presence was still healing him, just as he had once healed Leo. Outside, Leo lifted his head toward Jimmy's window, releasing a soft rumble that seemed to carry years of memory in its sound. Dr. Evans and Dr. Mara arrived early the next morning with their relocation proposal. The plan had been carefully crafted with input from 3 of the country's top wildlife sanctuaries, each eager to be part of this historic case. The Wilson Wildlife Preserve in North Carolina is our top choice, Dr. Evans explained, spreading photographs across Jimmy's hospital tray. They have a specialized big cat facility, experienced staff, and most importantly, they're willing to allow supervised visits once you're fully recovered. Jimmy studied the images with tired but clear eyes. The sanctuary looked beautiful. Hundreds of acres of protected land, modern facilities, and a dedicated medical center. And they understand Leo's unique situation? They're fascinated by it, Dr. Mara confirmed. Their head behaviorist wants to study the long-term implications of your bond. This could revolutionize our understanding of animal cognition and emotional intelligence. Outside, Leo maintained his vigil, though his posture had relaxed since Jimmy's awakening. He seemed to sense the change in atmosphere, the shift from crisis to resolution. His eyes still tracked every movement at the hospital entrance, but without the earlier tension. "The transport team is ready whenever you are," Dr. Franklin added gently. "But they want you present for the transfer. They believe Leo will cooperate better if he sees you're okay. We've arranged everything to make it as stress-free as possible." Jimmy nodded slowly. "He came all this way for me. I owe him a proper goodbye." He paused, looking out the window. "Though somehow, I don't think it will be goodbye forever. He's proven that distance doesn't mean much to him." The medical team arranged for Jimmy to be wheeled down to the entrance in a specialized transport chair. His recovery was progressing well, but they took no chances with his recent surgery. Security cleared the area, creating a safe corridor for the reunion. As the doors opened and Jimmy emerged into the morning light, Leo's reaction was immediate. The lion rose, his eyes fixed on his former savior. A low rumble emanated from his chest, not a growl, but a sound of recognition, of greeting. "Hey, old friend," Jimmy called softly. "Thank you for watching over me, but it's time for you to let others take care of you now." Leo took 3 careful steps forward, then sat, his scarred paw extended slightly, mirroring their moment through the glass days earlier. The morning sun caught his mane, turning it to gold, highlighting the regal bearing that had impressed even his critics. The sanctuary's transport vehicle waited nearby, its doors open, interior specially prepared for its unique passenger. Dr. Evans stood ready with the transfer protocols, though somehow everyone knew they wouldn't be needed. This wasn't going to be a typical wild animal transport. Around them, cameras clicked and rolled, capturing what many would later call the most extraordinary moment in human-animal relationship history. The crowd watched in reverent silence as man and beast prepared to part ways once again. Their bond having transformed not just their own lives, but the perspectives of everyone who had witnessed their remarkable story. 2 months after the dramatic events at Greenwood Hospital, Jimmy stood at the observation deck of the Wilson Wildlife Preserve, watching Leo explore his new territory. The lion had adapted remarkably well, though he still came running whenever Jimmy's car pulled into the sanctuary's parking lot. "His behavior continues to challenge everything we thought we knew," Dr. Evans said, reviewing her latest research notes. "The way he maintains connections with both his wild nature and his human bonds, it's unprecedented. We've documented cognitive abilities that were previously thought impossible in big cats." The sanctuary had become a center for studying animal intelligence and emotional capacity. Researchers from around the world visited to observe Leo and document his unique behaviors. His story had inspired changes in wildlife rehabilitation protocols and sanctuary practices across multiple continents. "Greenwood Hospital's donations have tripled," Dr. Franklin reported, joining them at the railing. "People were touched by the story. We've established a new wildlife trauma center in partnership with the sanctuary. The board finally understands what we were fighting for." Jimmy watched as Leo patrolled his enclosure, occasionally glancing up at the observation deck. The scar on his paw had faded slightly but remained visible, a reminder of where their extraordinary journey began. The documentary crew wants to film again next week, Susan mentioned. She had taken a position at the sanctuary's education center, helping share Leo's story with visitors. They're calling it The Lion's Watch, about loyalty that defies nature. 3 major networks are bidding for the rights. Jimmy nodded, remembering those tense days outside the hospital. You know, when I first found him in that poacher's trap, everyone said he was too far gone, that sometimes you have to accept loss and move on. But there was something in his eyes. Good thing you're both stubborn, Dr. Evans smiled. Your story has changed how we view animal consciousness. The research we're doing here could revolutionize conservation efforts worldwide. We've already received inquiries from 20 different countries. Leo approached the observation deck, releasing a soft rumble of greeting. Jimmy made his way down to the approved interaction area, where sanctuary staff had established safe protocols for their visits. Their reunion ritual had become famous, a testament to the enduring bond between them. As man and lion shared another moment of quiet connection, the afternoon sun caught their profiles. 2 beings who had saved each other, defied impossible odds, and in doing so, taught the world about the true meaning of loyalty, love, and the extraordinary bonds that can form between all living creatures. "Ready for your checkup, old friend?" Jimmy asked softly. Leo's gentle rumble was all the answer he needed. Their story had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful connections transcend the boundaries we think we understand. The future stretched before them, full of promise and discovery, as they began their next chapter together, forever changing our understanding of what's possible when love and loyalty know no bounds.